The subterranean pulse of New York City was a rhythm Marcus King knew better than his own heartbeat. To the rest of the world, Marcus was a phantom, a rumor whispered in the back rooms of speakeasies and boardroom meetings alike, the man who controlled the flow of illicit capital from the Bronx to the Battery. He was 6 feet 4 inches of immaculately tailored danger, a man whose skin was the color of deep obsidian, and whose presence sucked the oxygen out of a room. But down here, standing on the platform of the 4 train at Union Square, surrounded by the grimy tile and the smell of stale electricity, he was just another shadow in a coat worth more than the train car itself. He didn't ride the subway for efficiency. He had a fleet of armored SUVs and a helicopter on standby. He rode it for the voice. It was 8:15 a.m., the height of the morning rush, a chaotic symphony of screeching brakes and shuffling bodies, but Marcus stood perfectly still, his eyes closed behind dark sunglasses, waiting. Then it came. Over the crackling PA system, cutting through the dissonance like a blade of cool water, a woman's voice filled the station. Uptown Express trains are running with delays due to signal trouble at 14th Street. Please stand clear of the closing doors. It wasn't a recorded message. The cadence was too human, too uniquely soothing. It was calm, professional, yet possessed an undercurrent of authority that grounded Marcus in a way nothing else could. For 3 years since he had taken the throne of the city's underworld, this voice had been his medication. He didn't know her name, didn't know her face. He only knew that in a world where everyone wanted to kill him or sell him out, this invisible woman in the control center was the only honest thing left. He exhaled, his shoulders dropping an inch, the tension of a looming war with the Albanian syndicate momentarily forgotten. Miles away, in the windowless bunker of the rail control center in Midtown, Mei Lin adjusted her headset and took a sip of lukewarm green tea. Her workspace was a fortress of monitors, a glowing grid of the city's arteries. She was small, with sharp features and dark hair pulled back into a severe bun that mirrored her no-nonsense attitude. To her colleagues, May was a machine, the best dispatcher on the floor, capable of juggling 3 derailments and a medical emergency without raising her pulse. They didn't know that the calm was a mask. Inside, May was constantly calculating, managing an anxiety that hummed like a high-tension wire. The control center was her safe space, a place of order where she moved people like chess pieces, keeping them safe from a distance. Unit 402, hold at Grand Central, she murmured into her mic, her eyes scanning the CCTV feeds. Track obstruction reported. She watched the grain on the screen, the blur of commuters. She had no idea that one of those blurs was the most dangerous man in New York, and that he was currently stepping onto the number 4 train, his hand resting near the custom-barreled pistol beneath his cashmere coat. The train surged forward, plunging into the darkness of the tunnel. Marcus gripped the overhead rail, his bodyguards, 2 massive men named Tyrell and Santos, boxing him in casually so as not to draw attention. The car was packed. The lights flickered. Marcus felt a vibration in his pocket, a text message. He pulled it out. It was from an unknown number, just 3 emojis, a clock, a firecracker, and a skull. His instincts, honed by years of surviving assassination attempts, screamed at him. He looked up, his eyes darting to a backpack left unattended near the connector door. "Move," Marcus growled, shoving a startled tourist aside. "Get to the back." Tyrell didn't ask questions. He moved to shield his boss. But they were too late. The world dissolved into a blinding flash of white and a roar that felt less like sound and more like a physical blow to the chest. The explosion ripped through the forward section of the car, shattering glass and twisting metal. Marcus was thrown backward, his head slamming against a steel pole. Darkness followed the light. When consciousness clawed its way back, it brought pain. A high-pitched ringing screamed in Marcus's ears, drowning out the world. He tried to open his eyes, but everything was a blur of gray fog and stinging dust. He blinked, but the shapes refused to sharpen. He was blind. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to seize him. He reached out, his hand touching something wet and sticky on the floor. Blood. He couldn't hear his men. He couldn't see the exit. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning plastic. He tried to stand, but vertigo slammed him back down. He was trapped in a coffin of twisted metal, vulnerable for the first time in a decade. Then, the sound cut through the ringing. It wasn't the screams of the injured, though those were there. It was the emergency comms system, the speakers in the car crackling to life on a backup circuit. "Attention passengers on the 4 train," the voice said, her voice. It was trembling slightly, stripped of its usual distance, but it was still her. "This is Control. We are aware of the situation. Emergency services are en route. Listen to me carefully. The 3rd rail is still live. Do not exit the train onto the tracks. I repeat, do not exit." Marcus froze, his head cocking toward the speaker. It was his anchor. "If you are in the 2nd car," she continued, her voice gaining strength, almost as if she were speaking directly to him, "there is a breach in the rear connector door. The smoke is venting north. Stay low. Crawl toward the rear of the car. Use the emergency lighting strips on the floor as a guide." Marcus couldn't see the strips. The flash had burned his retinas, leaving him in a haze of gray static, but he could hear her breathing between the words. He closed his burning eyes and focused entirely on the sound. "Move back," she instructed, her voice guiding him like a lighthouse beam. "There is a structural collapse on the right side. Keep to the left. Keep to the left." Marcus dragged himself up, keeping his left shoulder against the wall. He stumbled over debris, his expensive suit shredded, his face masked in soot and blood. He found Tyrell's body, no pulse. He pushed the grief down, he would mourn later. Right now, he had to follow the voice. "You're going to be okay," Mei was saying, though she was talking to hundreds of people. "Stay calm, breath through your clothes, I'm right here with you." To Marcus, navigating the hellscape of the bombed-out train, it felt intimate. She was the thread pulling him out of the labyrinth. He moved blindly, trusting only her instructions. "The rear doors are jammed," she announced, her voice tightening with urgency. "You need to manually engage the release lever under the panel to your left. Someone needs to pull it." Marcus felt the panel. He ripped it open with a roar of exertion, his adrenaline compensating for his injuries, and yanked the lever. The doors hissed open. Fresh air hit his face. Hours later, the chaos had moved from the tunnel to the surface. Union Square was a war zone of flashing lights and sirens. Marcus sat in the back of a discreet ambulance, one owned by his organization, parked 3 blocks away from the police barricades. A private doctor was flushing his eyes. His vision was returning slowly, shadows resolving into shapes, shapes into faces. Silas, his second in command, a man with the face of a university professor and the heart of a shark, stood by the open doors. "It was the Morty family backed by the Russians," Silas said quietly, scrolling through a tablet. "We intercepted their chatter. They're celebrating. They think you're dead." "Let them think it for now," Marcus rasped, his throat raw from smoke. He blinked, his vision still swimming but clearing. "Who was the dispatcher?" Silas paused, looking up. "What?" "The dispatcher," Marcus repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "The woman on the comms, who is she?" Silas tapped his screen. "Mei Lin works out of the Midtown hub. Why?" "Because she saved me," Marcus said, leaning back and closing his eyes, the memory of her voice still vibrating in his skull. "And because they heard her too." "Sorry." "The explosion was timed," Marcus said, piecing it together. "They blew the train, but the secondary charges, the ones meant to collapse the tunnel completely, didn't go off. Why?" Silas frowned. "Tech failure." "No," Marcus opened his eyes, staring at the ceiling of the ambulance. "Because she rerouted the power grid to vent the smoke. I heard her ordering the grid switch. She inadvertently cut the power to their secondary detonators. She ruined their kill box." He sat up, ignoring the doctor's protest. "The Russians aren't sloppy, Silas. They'll review the logs. They'll know a dispatcher interfered. They won't care that she was just doing her job. They'll view her as a loose end, a witness who might have seen the trigger man on the platform cameras before the feed cut." Silas's face hardened. "She's a civilian, Marcus. She's not in the game." "She is now," Marcus said, ripping the IV from his arm. "Find her address, now." Mei Lin left the control center at 9:00 p.m. Her shift had been extended due to the catastrophe. She was exhausted, her bones aching with the phantom weight of the lives lost that morning. She had stayed on the line for 4 hours straight, guiding survivors, comforting the dying, coordinating with fire crews. She felt hollowed out. She pulled her coat tighter against the biting New York wind as she walked toward her apartment in Queens. The rain had started, a cold, miserable drizzle that slicked the pavement. She kept her head down, wanting only a hot shower and silence. She didn't notice the black SUV idling at the corner of her street. She didn't notice the two men in windbreakers smoking cigarettes by the bodega, their eyes tracking her movement. She fumbled for her keys at the entrance of her building. That was when she felt it, a shift in the air, a presence looming behind her. She spun around, a scream lodging in her throat. Marcus King stood there. He looked like a specter rising from the grave. His coat was new, but he moved with a stiffness that suggested injury. His eyes were hidden behind dark glasses, but the scar on his cheek was visible under the street lamp. He took up the entire doorway, blocking her path. "Mei Lin," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was deep, rougher than the smooth baritone she might have expected from his suit. It was the voice of a man who commanded gravity. "Who are you?" she stammered, clutching her bag like a shield. "What do you want?" "To keep you alive," Marcus said. He glanced over her shoulder toward the bodega. The two men he had spotted, Russian cleaners, were tossing their cigarettes and moving toward them. Marcus didn't flinch. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. "You need to come with me, now." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Mei said, panic spiking. She reached for the pepper spray on her keychain. "I'm calling the police." "The police can't stop what's coming down the street," Marcus said, his hand shooting out to grab her wrist. His grip was iron but not painful. "Look behind you. Two men, hands in their pockets, walking fast. Do you know them?" Mei looked. The men were breaking into a jog. One of them was reaching into his jacket. The reality of the violence she had heard over the radio all day suddenly materialized in front of her. "Get in the car," Marcus ordered, pulling her toward the curb where the SUV had pulled up, the rear door swinging open. "No," Mei fought, digging her heels in. "Let me go." "I am the only thing standing between you and a bullet," Marcus snarled, losing patience. The first gunshot cracked the air, chipping the brickwork inches from Mei's head. She screamed, ducking instinctively. Marcus didn't hesitate. He scooped her up, shielding her body with his own massive frame, and threw her into the back of the armored vehicle. He dove in after her, shouting "Go!" to the driver. The SUV shrieked away from the curb, tires spinning on the wet asphalt, just as the rear window spiderwebbed from a second impact. Mei scrambled into the corner of the leather seat, hyperventilating, staring at the man who had just kidnapped her. He took off his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were bloodshot and intense, staring at her with a terrifying mixture of obsession and resolve. "Welcome to my world, Mei," Marcus said, watching the hunters fade into the distance. "I suggest you buckle up." The interior of the armored SUV was a cocoon of silent luxury, a stark contrast to the violence blurring past the tinted windows. Rain lashed against the bulletproof glass, smearing the neon lights of the city into long, bleeding streaks of red and blue. Mei sat pressed against the furthest corner of the leather seat, her chest heaving, her hands trembling so violently she had to clasp them together in her lap. Every time the vehicle swerved or hit a pothole, she flinched, expecting another gunshot. Beside her, Marcus King was a statue carved from granite. He was speaking into a satellite phone, his voice low and rapid, issuing orders in a code she couldn't decipher. "Lock down the Tribeca secure site. Clean the street footage. I want the Russians blind." He hung up and finally looked at her. Up close, the damage from the explosion was more apparent. There was a jagged cut above his eyebrow, and the skin around his eyes was red and irritated, suggesting his vision was still compromised. Yet, the intensity of his gaze pinned her to the seat. "You're kidnapping me," Mei whispered, the reality finally piercing through the shock. "This is a felony. You can't just take people." "I just saved you from a double tap to the back of the head," Marcus replied, his tone devoid of apology. He reached into a cooler built into the console and pulled out a bottle of water, cracking the seal and offering it to her. "Drink. You're in shock." Mei slapped the bottle away. It tumbled onto the floor mat, water spilling onto the expensive carpet. "I don't want your water, I want to go home. My cat is alone. My sister is calling me in the morning. I have a shift tomorrow." Marcus looked at the spilled water, then back at her. A muscle in his jaw ticked. "Your shift is cancelled. Your sister will be told you've been transferred to a secure facility for a federal debriefing. As for the cat," he paused, pulling out his phone again and typing a quick message. "My team will retrieve it. It will be at the safe house within the hour." "You're insane," Mei breathed, backing away until her head hit the window. "Who are you?" "I am the man who runs the darkness so people like you can pretend the light is permanent," Marcus said cryptically. "My name is Marcus King, and until the people who blew up my train and shot at your apartment are dead, you belong to me." The car descended into the bowels of a parking garage beneath a monolithic glass tower in Tribeca. The ascent was a blur of private elevators and retinal scans. When the doors finally slid open, May stepped out into a penthouse that looked less like a home and more like a fortress designed by a minimalist architect. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the rain-drenched city, but the glass was thick, layered with protective laminate. The furniture was sleek, dark, and sparse. The air smelled of ozone and expensive leather. Marcus threw his coat onto a chair, revealing a holster strapped over a dress shirt that was stained with soot and dried blood. He winced, rubbing his temples. The adrenaline of the rescue was fading, leaving the pain of the concussion to rush back in. "Silas," Marcus barked at the air. A man in a suit appeared from a hallway, the same man from the ambulance. "Secure the perimeter, no one in or out, and get the doctor back here. My eyes are burning." "No doctor," May said. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Both men turned to look at her. She swallowed hard, her dispatcher instincts kicking in. In the control center, when a train operator was panicking, she took charge. She saw Marcus swaying slightly, his balance off. "The light is hurting him. He has a concussion. If you bring a doctor with a flashlight in here, he'll vomit. You need to dim the lights and get him ice." Marcus stared at her, a flicker of amusement crossing his lips. "She's giving orders, Silas. Do as she says." Silas dimmed the lights via a wall panel and vanished. The room plunged into a soft, twilight gloom. Marcus sank onto a sofa, leaning his head back and closing his eyes. For a moment he looked less like a warlord and more like a man breaking under the weight of the world. May stood awkwardly in the center of the vast room, hugging herself. She should run. She should find a phone. But the elevator required a code, and she was 40 stories up. "Why?" she asked into the silence. "You said I ruined their kill box. How?" Marcus didn't open his eyes. The explosion was meant to derail the train and breach the tunnel walls. The secondary charges were wired into the main track power. When you rerouted the grid to vent the smoke, you cut the juice to the blasting caps. You saved 300 people, May, including me. He turned his head slightly toward her. "But the Morty family doesn't believe in heroism. They believe in loose ends. You are the only civilian who might have seen the bomber drop the bag. And you're the one who stopped their grand finale. They want you dead to send a message." May felt a cold shiver crawl down her spine. "So I'm a target because I did my job." "You're a target because you were competent in a city of incompetence," Marcus murmured. He gestured to the cushion beside him. "Sit, please. You're packing. I can hear your heartbeat from here." May sat, but she chose an armchair 6 feet away. "I recognized your voice," Marcus said softly, the confession hanging in the air. "In the tunnel, and before that, every morning." May frowned. "What do you mean?" "I ride the 4 train every day at 8:15, Marcus admitted. "Not because I have to, but because I listen to the PA, your voice. It's the only thing that quiets the noise in my head." He opened his eyes, squinting through the pain to look at her. "Today, when I was blind, when I was crawling through that fire, I would have died down there. I was ready to give up. Then you spoke. You told me to stand up. You guided me out." Mei stared at him, stunned. The feared crime boss, the man whose name she had seen in terrified headlines, was telling her that her announcements about track maintenance were his lullaby. It was absurd. It was terrifying. And yet, there was a raw vulnerability in his tone that made her fear recede just an inch. "I was just reading protocol," she said quietly. "No," Marcus shook his head. "You were leading. There is a difference." Suddenly, the elevator chimed. Mei jumped. Silas walked in, carrying a plastic travel crate. A familiar meow echoed in the room. "Miso?" Mei scrambled up, rushing to the crate. She opened it, and her ginger tabby cat bolted out, leaping into her arms. She buried her face in the cat's fur, tears finally spilling over. It was a small piece of her shattered life, retrieved by a mafia hit squad. "I keep my word," Marcus said, watching her. Later that night, the storm intensified. Thunder rattled the heavy glass panes. Mei had been given a guest room that was larger than her entire apartment. It had a locking door which she had engaged immediately. But sleep was impossible. Every shadow looked like a gunman, every sound was a trigger. Around 3:00 a.m., driven by thirst and restlessness, she crept out into the living area. The penthouse was dark, lit only by the city glow below. She found Marcus on the balcony. He was standing in the rain, unprotected, his shirt soaked through, gripping the railing with white knuckles. He wasn't wearing his sunglasses. He was staring out at the city, but his eyes were unfocused, staring into nothingness. He was shaking. Mei hesitated. She should go back to her room, but the dispatcher in her, the part of her that couldn't ignore a distress signal, moved her feet forward. She unlocked the sliding door and stepped out into the rain. The wind whipped her hair across her face. "You'll get pneumonia," she said, shouting over the wind. Marcus didn't turn. The cold helps, it distracts from the ringing. Mei stepped closer. She could see the tension in his back, the way he was fighting to keep himself upright. He was having a post-traumatic episode, the delayed reaction to the explosion. "Come inside," she said, her voice dropping into that professional, soothing register she used for jumpers on the platform. "Marcus, listen to my voice. Step back from the edge. Come inside." He froze, her voice cutting through the storm. It triggered the same reflex as it had in the tunnel, an automatic obedience, a grounding. Slowly he turned. He looked wrecked. The invincible king of New York was just a man shivering in the rain. He looked at her, and for the first time Mei didn't see a monster. She saw a survivor just like her. "I can't see the exit," he whispered, a flashback to the tunnel. "There is no exit right now," Mei said, reaching out and tentatively taking his freezing hand. "Just the living room, come on." She led him inside. He followed her like a child. She grabbed a towel from the bathroom and draped it over his shoulders. He sat on the edge of the sofa, water dripping from his nose and chin. Mei stood in front of him, drying his hair. The intimacy of the act was shocking to both of them, but neither stopped it. "Why are you helping me?" Marcus asked, his voice rough. "I kidnapped you." "Because you're the only one who knows how scared I am right now," Mei admitted, her hands pausing on his shoulders. "And because you brought me my cat." Marcus reached up, his large hand covering hers. His skin was cold, hers was warm. "I won't let them touch you, Mei. I will burn this city to ash before I let them hurt you." "I know," she said. And she did. She realized with a jolt that the safest place in New York City wasn't the police station or the rail control center. It was right here, in the shadow of the monster. Meanwhile, across the river in a warehouse in Brooklyn, Dmitry Volkov, the head of the Russian syndicate, watched the footage from the street camera. He saw Marcus King throw the woman into the SUV. He saw the car speed away. Dmitry paused the video, zooming in on Mei's terrified face. "Find out everything about her," Dmitry said to his lieutenant. "Family, friends, habits. King has a weakness now, he has a pet, and if we can't kill the king directly, we will break his heart first." He lit a cigar, smiling through the smoke. "Prepare the boys, we aren't going into hiding, we're going hunting." 2 days had passed since the extraction, and the penthouse had transformed from a fortress into a cage of gilded tension. Outside, New York was relentless, a gray wash of rain and sirens, but inside, time seemed to warp. Marcus had recovered enough to move without the stagger of a concussion, though the headache still prowled behind his eyes. He spent his hours packing the perimeter of the glass walls, a predator sensing a shift in the wind, while Mei occupied the kitchen island, her laptop open, remotely accessing the MTA servers through a triple-encrypted VPN Silas had set up. She wasn't just hiding anymore, she was working. If the Russians were tracking movement, she wanted to see the flow of the city before they did. "You're staring at that screen like it's a bomb defusal manual," Marcus said, walking into the kitchen. He was wearing a black tactical shirt that clung to his frame, the holster back in place. The domesticity of the scene, Mei drinking tea, him checking weapons, was a jarring juxtaposition that neither of them acknowledged out loud. "It might be," Mei replied, not looking up. "I'm monitoring the maintenance logs for the subway lines under this block. There's been an unauthorized access request for the ventilation shafts near Canal Street. It's labeled as emergency repair, but there's no work order filed with Central." She turned the laptop toward him. "Someone is trying to get under us." Marcus leaned in, his hand brushing her shoulder. The contact sent a jolt through her, a stark reminder of the strange, magnetic gravity that had developed between them in the last 48 hours. "Volkov," he murmured, reading the code. "He's not coming for the front door, he's coming from the bottom up." He looked at her, his dark eyes softening for a fraction of a second. "You have a gift for seeing things others miss." "I listened to the noise," Mei said softly. "You taught me that the quiet is what's dangerous." "Mei," Marcus said, his voice dropping. He reached into his waistband and pulled out a sleek, compact Glock 19. He placed it on the marble counter between them. The metal made a heavy, definitive clack. "I need you to take this." Mei recoiled slightly. "I'm a dispatcher, Marcus. I talk people to safety, I don't shoot them." "We are past the point of talking," Marcus said, sliding the gun toward her. "If they breach the perimeter, Silas and I will hold them. But if we fall or if we get separated, you cannot be defenseless. Volkov doesn't take prisoners, he takes trophies." He moved around the counter, standing behind her, guiding her hands to the weapon. "Grip it high, thumbs forward. It's not about aiming with your eyes, it's about pointing with your will." His chest was pressed against her back, his arms enveloping her. It was an embrace of violence and protection intertwined. Mei felt the cold steel and the heat of his body, her heart hammering against her ribs. She nodded, her fingers tightening around the grip. The moment was shattered by a piercing electronic shriek. The smart home panel on the wall flashed crimson. "Perimeter breach," Silas's voice roared over the intercom. "North stairwell and express elevator override. They hacked the building security. They're inside." Marcus moved instantly, the tenderness vanishing, replaced by lethal efficiency. He shoved a spare magazine into Mei's pocket. "Stay low, stay behind the island. Do not shoot unless they cross the threshold of the living room." "Where are you going?" Mei cried as he moved toward the foyer. "To welcome our guests," Marcus growled. The double doors of the penthouse exploded inward before Marcus even reached them. A cloud of debris and smoke filled the entryway. Gunfire erupted, loud, deafening cracks that shattered the minimalist silence. Marcus dove behind a heavy oak pillar, returning fire with a terrifying precision. Two figures in tactical gear dropped in the hallway. Silas appeared from the side corridor, laying down suppressive fire with an automatic rifle. The living room became a kill box. Bullets shredded the expensive leather furniture and spiderwebbed the bulletproof glass windows. Mei crouched behind the marble island, hands over her ears, the gun clutched to her chest. She squeezed her eyes shut, terror threatening to paralyze her. "This is it," she thought. "This is where I die." But then, through the ringing in her ears, she heard it, a sound distinct from the gunfire. It was a hiss, a mechanical whirring from the vents above. "Gas!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the chaos. They're pumping gas into the vents. Marcus heard her. He glanced up and saw the white vapor curling from the AC ducts. It was VX nerve gas or something equally vile. Volkov wasn't trying to capture them anymore. He was trying to flush them out like rats. "Silas, fall back," Marcus shouted. "We can't hold the room." "The elevator is cut," Silas yelled back, reloading. "We're trapped." "No," Marcus shouted, sprinting back toward the kitchen, firing 2 rounds blindly into the smoke to keep the attackers at bay. He grabbed Mei's arm, hauling her up. "Not the elevator, the service line." "What service line?" Mei choked, coughing as the acrid gas began to sting her throat. "My private exit," Marcus said. He dragged her toward the pantry. He kicked aside a shelf of dry goods, revealing a heavy steel biometric scanner set into the wall. He slammed his bloody palm against it. A section of the wall hissed and slid open, revealing a dark, narrow concrete staircase spiraling down into the abyss. "Silas, move." Silas provided cover fire as they retreated into the secret passage. The heavy steel door slammed shut, sealing them off from the gas and the gunfire. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. They were in a concrete throat, lit only by emergency red strip lights. "Where does this go?" Mei asked, breathless, her legs shaking. "It bypasses the building's foundation," Marcus said, checking his ammo. He was bleeding from a graze on his arm, but he didn't seem to notice. "It leads to the old City Hall station loop. It's abandoned. It connects to the 6th line." They descended rapidly, the air growing cooler and damper. They were leaving the sky and returning to the underworld. When they reached the bottom, Marcus kicked open a rusted grate. They stepped out onto a dusty, abandoned subway platform. The vaulted tile ceilings were beautiful and ghostly, covered in decades of grime. The tracks were silent, the third rail dead. "We need to keep moving," Silas whispered, his voice echoing too loudly. "If they know about the vents, they might know about this tunnel." "They do," Mei said, stopping dead. She pointed to the signal light at the end of the tunnel. It was green. "So?" Silas asked. "It's an abandoned station," Mei said, her voice trembling but certain. "The signals should be dark. Green means the track is live. Green means a train is coming." As if on cue, the rumble started. It wasn't the rhythmic clatter of a commuter train. It was the heavy, grinding roar of a work locomotive, a diesel engine used for maintenance, and it was coming from the direction they needed to go. "It's a hit team," Marcus realized. "They're cutting us off from both ends. They knew we'd run to the tunnels." Headlights swept around the curve, blinding them. The train screeched to a halt 50 yards away. Men began to pour out of the modified carriage, silhouettes against the harsh lights. "Back," Marcus ordered, "into the cross-tunnel." They scrambled off the platform, running into the dark labyrinth of service connectors that linked the old stations. They were running blind now. Marcus's kingdom had been invaded. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped underground. They took shelter in a pump room, a small concrete bunker filled with rusted machinery. Silas barred the door, but it wouldn't hold for long. Outside, they could hear the shouts of the Russian mercenaries echoing off the tunnel walls. "We can't fight them all," Silas said grimly. "Marcus, you take the girl. I'll hold the door. I can buy you 5 minutes." "No," Marcus snarled. "We leave together." "There is no together left," Silas shouted. "There are 20 of them. We need an exit strategy." Mei looked at the rusted control panel on the wall of the pump room. It was archaic, covered in dust, but the schematics were universal. She wiped the glass of a pressure gauge. "This isn't just a pump room," Mei whispered. Her mind was racing, connecting the dots of the city's infrastructure. "This is a flood control station for the East River tunnels." Marcus looked at her. "What?" "The tunnels under the river. They have floodgates to prevent drowning in case of a breach," Mei said, her eyes widening. "If I trip the emergency sensor, the system will think the tunnel is flooding. It will slam the watertight blast doors shut on the main line." "Trapping us in here with them," Silas asked. No, Mei looked at Marcus. Trapping them out there, but we have to time it perfectly. If we close the doors while they are on the platform, they're sealed in, but we need to get past them first. Marcus looked at the door, then at Mei. He saw the fire in her eyes. She wasn't the scared victim anymore. She was the dispatcher taking control of the board. Can you trigger it remotely? Marcus asked. No, Mei shook her head. I have to do it from the junction box out there, on the wall, exposed. Marcus checked his gun. He had one full clip left. He looked at Silas. Cover fire, I am the shield, she is the key. He turned to Mei, grabbing her face in his hands. The grime and blood on his skin smeared onto hers, war paint for the final stand. You run for that box. You don't look at the shooters. You don't look at me. You look at the lever. Do you understand? Yes, Mei breathed. Then let's bring the house down, Marcus said. He kicked the door open. The tunnel erupted in noise. Marcus and Silas stepped out, unleashing a wall of fire that forced the advancing Russians to dive for cover. In the chaos, Mei sprinted. She ran low, her sneakers slapping against the wet concrete, the air buzzing with bullets like angry hornets. She reached the junction box. It was rusted shut. She screamed, slamming the butt of the gun Marcus had given her against the latch. Once, twice, it broke. She yanked the heavy iron lever down, just as a bullet sparked against the metal inches from her hand. A siren wailed, a low, mournful sound that shook the earth. Massive steel bulkheads began to descend from the ceiling of the main tunnel, grinding metal against stone. The Russians realized too late what was happening. They tried to retreat to their train, but the blast doors were closing, cutting off their exit and their line of sight. Go, go, Marcus roared, grabbing Mei and pulling her through the narrowing gap of a secondary service door, just as the main bulkhead slammed shut with a boom that felt like a heart attack. They were on the other side. Silence fell, save for the hum of the old electric lights. They were alone in a different section of the tunnel, separated from the army of killers by 6 inches of solid steel. Silas slid down the wall, clutching his side. His suit was dark with blood. That was close, he wheezed. Marcus knelt beside him, checking the wound. It was bad. Then he looked up at Mei. She was standing by the closed blast door, trembling, staring at her hands. You did it, Marcus said, standing and walking to her. He pulled her into him, burying his face in her hair. You saved us. We're not safe yet, Mei whispered into his chest. We're in the deep tunnels now, under the river. There's no cell service, no radio, and Volkov knows we're here. He'll send men to the other side of the river to wait for us. Let them wait, Marcus said, his eyes hard as flint. We aren't going to the other side. We're going to the heart of the system. We're going to the central command hub. If Volkov wants a war in my city, I'm going to use the whole city to crush him. He took her hand, his grip unyielding. Lead the way, dispatcher. The air in the subriver tunnels was thick enough to chew, tasting of ancient rust and stale water. The only sound was the wet slap of their shoes on the concrete and the ragged rasp of Silas's breathing. They had been walking for 20 minutes, moving deeper into the arteries of the city, bypassing the active lines for the maintenance shafts that existed off the maps. Silas was failing. The bullet in his side had done too much damage. He leaned heavily on Marcus, his face gray and slick with sweat in the emergency red lighting. Leave me, Silas wheezed, stumbling as his foot caught on a loose tie. I'm dead weight, Marcus. You know the protocol. I don't follow protocol when it comes to family, Marcus grunted, hoisting Silas's arm higher over his shoulder. We're almost to the Hutchamahan relay. There's an extraction point there. There's no extraction, Silas whispered, his legs buckling. He slid down the curved wall of the tunnel, hitting the floor with a finality that stopped Marcus in his tracks. Silas looked up, his eyes glassy but sharp. Volkov is tracking the blood trail. If I stay here, I can hold the narrow pass. I have 2 clips left. I can buy you 10 minutes. Ma knelt beside him, pressing her hands against his wound, but the blood seeped through her fingers, hot and relentless. "We can fix this," she said, her voice trembling. "We just need to get you to a hospital." Sullers smiled, a weak, bloody expression. He looked at Ma. "You're a good woman, Ma Lin. You kept him alive when he was blind. Now keep him alive when he sees red." He turned to Muckas, his grip on his boss's hand tightening with surprising strength. "Go, take the throne back. Burn them all." Muckas looked at his lieutenant, the man who had stood by him since they were street runners in the Bronx. A silent communication passed between them, a farewell of warriors. Muckas nodded once, his jaw set in stone. He handed Sullers his last spare magazine. "Give them hell, Sullers." "Go," Sullers ordered, raising his weapon toward the dark tunnel behind them. Muckas grabbed Ma's hand. "Don't look back," he commanded, his voice cracking slightly. He pulled her into the darkness. As they ran, the sound of gunfire erupted behind them, the lonely, defiant bark of a single rifle against an approaching swarm. Ma sobbed once, a short, sharp sound, but she kept running. They reached the relay room 10 minutes later. It wasn't a station. It was a cavernous bunker filled with humming server racks and thick bundles of cables that pulsed like the city's nervous system. This was an older, redundant control hub, a relic from the Cold War designed to keep the trains running even if Midtown was a crater. "Can you use this?" Muckas asked, kicking the door shut and jamming a steel pipe through the handles. Ma ran to the console. It was dusty, but the screens flickered to life with a touch. "It's connected to the main grid," she said, her fingers flying across the archaic keyboard. "I can see everything, the entire line," she gasped. Muckas, look. On the monitors, a cluster of red dots was moving rapidly toward their position from the north tunnel. Volkov's men. But on the south feed, she saw something else. A single train, moving slowly, completely dark. "That's Volkov," Muckas said, staring at the screen. "He's not sending just foot soldiers. He commandeered a work train. He's coming to run us down." "He thinks he controls the tracks," Ma said, her eyes narrowing. The fear was still there, pounding in her chest, but beneath it was a cold, hard anger. They had killed Sullers. They had destroyed her life, and they were in her domain now. "He's wrong. I am the dispatcher." "What can you do?" "I can't stop the train physically," Ma said, typing furiously. "But I can lie to it. I can trick the signal system into thinking the track ahead is clear when it's not. I can overload the third rail in Sector 4. I can turn the lights off. I can make them blind." "Do it," Muckas said, checking his empty chamber. He had no bullets left. He pulled a combat knife from his boot. "Blind them, and I'll do the rest." Ma hit the execute command. In the tunnel outside, the world went black. The emergency lights died. The signal lights vanished. Volkov's train, creeping forward, suddenly screeched as the automatic braking system engaged. Ma had tripped the dead man's switch remotely. The train lurched to a halt just outside the relay room doors. "Now," Muckas roared. He didn't wait for them to breach. He opened the door and charged into the darkness. Ma watched the monitors. She switched to the thermal camera view. She saw Muckas, a ghost in the dark, moving with terrifying speed. He didn't need to see, he knew the rhythm of the violence. She saw him pull a man from the train cabin. She saw the flash of the knife. But there were too many of them. Volkov stepped out of the rear car, flanked by two massive bodyguards with night vision goggles. They had the advantage. Muckas was pinned down behind a concrete pillar, trapped by suppressive fire. Ma looked at her console. She had one card left to play. The PA system. It was wired into every speaker in the tunnel, designed to override all other sounds in an emergency. She grabbed the microphone. Her hand shook, but her voice was steady. "Attention," she said. Her voice boomed through the tunnel, amplified to a deafening volume, echoing off the curved walls like the voice of a vengeful god. In the tunnel, the Russians froze. The sound was disorienting, coming from everywhere at once. "High-voltage discharge imminent," Ma announced, her tone calm, authoritative, the same voice that had guided thousands of commuters. Track 4 is now live. Structural integrity failing. She slammed her hand onto the overload button for the lighting grid. The tunnel was suddenly flooded with a blinding, stroboscopic white light as the halogen banks surged way beyond their capacity. The Russians, wearing night vision goggles, screamed as the sudden flare blinded them, the amplification of the light burning their retinas. They tore the goggles off, stumbling. Muckas, who had squeezed his eyes shut the moment he heard her voice, opened them. He moved. He took the first bodyguard down with a throat strike. He took the gun. He spun and dropped the second man. Now it was just him and Volkov. Volkov, blinking tears from his eyes, fired wildly. Muckas didn't flinch. He closed the distance, knocking the gun from the Russian's hand. They crashed into the side of the train, a brutal melee of fists and rage. Volkov was big, but Muckas was fighting for something more than territory. He was fighting for the woman whose voice was filling the air. Ma continued to speak, her voice a rhythmic chant that covered the sound of Mucka's movements. Emergency services are en route. The perimeter is sealed. There is no exit. Muckas drove his knee into Volkov's chest, then slammed the Russian's head against the steel hull of the train. Volkov crumpled. Muckas stood over him, chest heaving, blood dripping from his knuckles. He picked up Volkov's gun and aimed it. "For Sullahs," Muckas whispered. The gunshot was lost in the echo of Ma's announcements. 5 minutes later, silence returned to the tunnel. Muckas walked back into the relay room. He was battered, bruised, his expensive shirt in tatters, covered in the grime of the underground. He looked at Ma. She was still holding the microphone, her knuckles white. He walked over to her and gently prod her fingers off the device. He turned the mic off. "It's over," he said softly. Ma looked up at him and the adrenaline finally crashed. Her knees gave way. Muckas caught her, pulling her against his chest. They slid to the floor together, sitting amidst the hum of the servers. "You killed him?" she asked, her face buried in his neck. "It's done, the head is cut off, the snake will die." Muckas kissed the top of her head. "We need to go, the police are actually coming this time. I triggered the silent alarm on the way in." "They'll arrest you," Ma said, pulling back to look at him. "They won't find me," Muckas said. He cupped her face. "But they will find you. You're the victim here, Ma. A dispatcher held hostage, forced to open the gates. You survived, that's the story." "I don't want to go back to that life," Ma said, tears welling up. "I can't just sit in that chair and announce delays like none of this happened." "You won't have to," Muckas promised. "But I need time. I have to clean up the mess Volkov left. I have to secure the city so no one ever comes for you again. I have to disappear for a while." "How long?" "As long as it takes." He leaned in, kissing her deeply, a kiss that tasted of blood and desperation and promise. "Listen to the radio, Ma, just listen." He stood up, pulled the hood of a dead mercenary's jacket over his head, and vanished into the shadows of the service tunnel just as the first beams of NYPD flashlights cut through the gloom at the far end of the platform. 6 months later. The snow was falling softly on New York City, turning the grime of the streets into a pristine white blanket. Ma Lin sat in a coffee shop near Columbus Circle, watching the steam rise from her cup. She looked different now. Her hair was cut shorter, sharper. She wore a coat that cost more than her old annual salary. She wasn't a dispatcher anymore. The settlement from the MTA for her trauma, coupled with an anonymous donation to her bank account from a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, had ensured she never had to work again. But she still rode the subway. She checked her watch. It was 8:15 a.m. She gathered her things and walked down the stairs to the one train platform. It was crowded, the usual morning chaos. She stood by the edge, not fearing the tracks anymore, but respecting them. She knew the power that ran beneath the concrete. The train pulled in. She stepped into the third car. It was packed. She grabbed a pole, closing her eyes, letting the rhythm of the city wash over her. The train departed, the speakers crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice said. It wasn't the conductor. It wasn't the automated system. It was a deep, baritone voice that made the hair on May's arms stand up, a voice that commanded gravity. "We are being held momentarily at this station due to train traffic ahead." The passengers sighed and groaned, burying their faces in their phones, but May froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was a pre-recorded message, generic, something patched into the system. But it was his voice. He had hacked the PA. "Please be patient," the voice continued. "The wait is over." May looked up. At the far end of the car, standing by the connector door, was a man in a long black wool coat. He was wearing sunglasses, even in the dim light of the subway car. He was looking directly at her. The crowd between them seemed to blur. Marcus King took off his glasses. The scar above his eye had faded to a thin white line. He didn't smile, but the intensity in his eyes burned with a possessive warmth. He tipped his head slightly toward the door, an invitation. The train slowed for the next station. The doors opened. Marcus stepped out. May didn't hesitate. She didn't look back at the empty seat or the confused tourists. She stepped out onto the platform, following the man who had turned her world into a beautiful, chaotic war zone. He waited for her by the turnstiles. When she reached him, he didn't say a word. He just held out his hand. May took it. His grip was warm, solid, an anchor in the storm. "Where are we going?" she asked, falling into step beside him as they walked up the stairs toward the snowy city streets. Marcus looked at her, and for the first time in 6 months he truly smiled. "Home," he said, "and then I'm buying you a new cat carrier. The old one is terrible." May laughed, the sound bright and free, echoing up the stairwell as they emerged into the light together. The king of the city and the voice that guided him.